And he says, because that, when they knew God, you see, one time the Chinese knew God, the Japanese knew God. One time the Indians knew God, you see. They knew God. But this was after the flood of Noah and after the Tower of Babel. Because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God. Neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, like today, professing them to be wise, they become fools. Verse 23, and they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like unto a corruptible man, or a bird, or four-footed beast, and creeping things. God told you how paganism started, how heathenism started, and they did know the truth before that, and they turned away from the truth deliberately to serve other creatures rather than the living God. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their hearts. So they were given up for the lust of their hearts. And he says to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Change the truth of God into a lie, the Bible. Worshipped and served the creature, worshiping creatures, more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause, God gave them up into vile affections. Just turn them loose. Vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. I was in a church in Oregon where one woman tore that crazy church to pieces. She acted real sweet and nice, and she just got one man's wife after another and began to make love to her until she messed that church up. When I got there, I was an angry man, and I tore into that bunch and said, "You're not going to live right. Get out those doors and don't you come back here anymore. I pronounce the judgment of God upon you." I was so angry. Poor little kid preachers that don't know inside of them how people ought to live and have a discerning spirit as to what's good and what's bad, you see. And one woman began it. She told me so herself. She asked for deliverance. She went from house to house while the men were at work and contaminated their women by teaching them to be lesbians along with her. In verse 27 it says, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the women, turn in their lust. Now God doesn't call it any nice word. He says, in their lust one to one another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, plainly stupid, and receiving in themselves that recompense of the error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. That's where this nation's getting right now. To a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, and covetousness, maliciousness, envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers. He said that's the kind of people they are, without understanding. They're covenant breakers. They have no natural affection that's natural to the human person. They're implacable and they are unmerciful, not knowing, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. They're worthy of death. Not only to do the same, but even if you have pleasure. Oh, that's a lifestyle. Don't bother him, you see.
The gay subculture is built around sexuality. So gay theater is about sex. Gay poetry is erotic poetry. Gay art is erotic art. Eroticism is the fiber of the gay culture. If you look at a very glossy, polished magazine, a gay magazine, let's say, and in the cover, it's a very sophisticated cover, and the first 2 or 3 articles will be a very intellectual, sociological or political discussion about the gay movement. And then as you go in the back, you'll see all these ads and all these 900 numbers, and that's where the money is. That's where the whole economy of the gay movement is.
Studies show that male homosexuals average between 20 and 106 partners every year. The average homosexual has 300 to 500 partners in his lifetime. 37% engage in sadomasochism. At least 28% have engaged in sodomy with more than 1,000 men. Compared to heterosexuals, male homosexuals are 8 times more likely to have had hepatitis, 14 times more likely to have had syphilis, and 5,000 times more likely to have contracted AIDS.
Now, in Chad, in Africa, over 40% of their military have AIDS today. They don't have science and they don't have a lot of money, so that whole nation may soon die. Over the face of this earth, there are multiplied millions of people who have the virus today. Lil Taylor, the actress, was giving an address over in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago. And she was telling the people how to be careful about disease, and especially AIDS. And a man spoke up and interrupted her and said, "I won't ever have AIDS." And she looked at him with tears running down her face. And she said, "Sir, my daughter-in-law is dying of AIDS right now. And she's raising my 2 little grandchildren, and we don't know what they're going to be." And said, "Sir, in a few years, every home in America will have an AIDS patient in it." This thing is so much bigger than most people realize. You break the laws of God, it all begins with homosexualism. You break the laws of God, and you have to pay for it. Where's God's mercy? Well, where's your intelligence, my friend? He didn't tell you to do that. It's not normal. It's no more normal for me to kiss a man than kiss that wall. Between the two, I'll take it out the wall. Yeah. I often tell people, as I told a man on television, that if all the roosters were like these homosexuals, you wouldn't have any eggs next week. And if all the hogs were like the homosexuals, you wouldn't have any bacon either. And if all the bulls were like that bunch, it'd be the end of beefsteak. They can't produce a thing. And if all the men were like that, this would be the terminal generation on the face of this earth. I want to say that this is the most serious thing, and why? How a leader in the first week of being in his position, where do the homosexuals want to go? They want to go where they're naked men. They lust to get there. They want to be there. There's the most dangerous spot. Oh no, that great big brazen 240-pounder, they won't tackle him first. But that little boy that came from a nice little home that nobody's ever told him a thing, they'll give him candy. They'll hug him and say, don't be sad. Don't be lonesome. They'll give him another gift. And the first thing you know, he will be committing homosexual acts with this person. And the reason for it, you say, well, he's the only one that loved me. Nobody else paid any attention to me.
Went into the gay lifestyle right out of high school when I was 18, was in that for 2 years, and I was constantly trying to fill some kind of void that was there. And I was doing anything I could to fill it, primarily through sexual encounters and temporary relationships that did not last. And I just found that after 2 years that I needed something to boost my sagging self-esteem. So I became a female impersonator, solely out of the need for attention and affirmation. I was worshipped by people in the lifestyle. But after 4 years, I would go home, and the loneliness was even worse. The depression would be worse because I was getting all this attention at the bar in shows that I would do, and when I would go home, I was still alone, still looking for somebody.
On July 19, 1992, John Paulk was married.
Our military men are upset because they know a little more than some others do. That these men should only have real strong men when you all shower in the same place and you all dress in the open in a barracks, you see. But it isn't only there. This thing is raging in Congress. It is raging in government. It is raging in business. It is raging in your schools. It is raging in your churches. Notre Dame has sent men out of this city, and some have already died, you see. It's raging in all kinds of religious places. You say, what in the world we can do? Well, I'd get the name and address of my congressman, and I'd drop him a letter real quick and say, you're not my friend if you don't stand against that evil. Get this tape and send it to him. So you better listen to this tape here. See what God has to say. God has a voice in this. And if you don't hear God's voice, you may wish to God one day you'd heard his voice. You see. And I don't want you to think this is a small political ball to be thrown around. This is the life and the death of a nation. The life and the death of a nation. They don't know that a homosexual normally, craves a new person all the time to explore him, to exploit him, you see. The average person don't know that, you see. The leaders in our country don't seem to know that. This is a raging plague that won't stop, that will not stop. Desire rises up in these poor people that I had a man to tell me, he said, Sumrall, when that thing hits me, perspiration falls off all 10 of my fingers, just pours off. And he says, I run out of my office and I'll find the dirtiest, filthiest creep down the alley and start having love with that creature. And I wouldn't even speak to him otherwise. But I said, you will never know the craving and the desire and the overpowering spirit of homosexualism. And I want to tell you, my friend, Jesus can set you free. Jesus loves sinners, but he don't love sin. He will save a rebellious person, but he won't accept your rebellion. This is the day to seek God. We should seek God for our nation. Our nation. We let one little woman named O'Hare walk in and steal every Bible out of every school in our nation. And her own son said she was as dirty as could be, had intercourse with any man that wanted to lay with her, and he had to be reared in that kind of mess. Sure, she hated the Bible. It exposed the kind of life she had lived. We let her do it. A man named John Dewey. We let him write some textbooks. and bring humanism into our public schools.